gift was hidden under a tarp in the shed, and James's hands were shaking when he lifted it. Not jewelry, not flowers, a small refrigerated unit. The kind that meant his wife could finally sleep without racing to rental facilities at midnight, without praying temperatures would hold, without carrying the weight of the contract alone on her shoulders. She stared at the cold metal like it was a wall she could finally lean against.
7 words that turned the gift into a question.
Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number.
Unknown number?
Just 7 words that turned the gift into a question. Nice unit.
Nice unit.
Some gifts make enemies. Have you ever received something so thoughtful it scared you?
Now you have everything to lose.
Because now you had something precious to lose. 3 weeks earlier, the best days had started with small things going right. Hello and welcome back. When something good finally arrives, the hardest part isn't receiving it. It's believing you're allowed to keep it. 3 weeks earlier, the best days in their house didn't start with big announcements. They started with small things going right. Ni woke up asking for fruit like she'd never been sick a day in her life. Anna came into the kitchen with her care cards stacked neatly, wearing that serious. And James, after a week of logs, seals, and city lobbies, made coffee and actually sat down. Not standing, not pacing, sitting. James's mother was still with them that morning, folding laundry at the table like it was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't speak much, but she didn't look like she was holding her breath anymore either. James's wife opened the shop for the morning rush. And for once, her shoulders didn't feel pinned to her ears. People came for oranges and guavas and the familiar warmth of their gate shop. Luan handled the counter like he'd been doing it his whole life. He even started greeting customers with, "Welcome to Hill Fruits," like they were a real brand now. Mr. Hung walked by, glanced at the new 2-person rule sign behind the counter, and nodded once, approving. "Quiet discipline," he said. James heard him and smiled faintly. That's the goal. By early afternoon, the shop calmed down. Luan took over the front again and waved them off like he was shooing tired parents towards something better. "Go home," he said. "If you keep working like this, you'll start weighing fruit in your sleep." So James and his wife went home with the kids, and the house felt like a soft landing. Anna spread her crayons across the floor and drew a picture of the office building with a tiny fruit box in front of it. She labeled it, "Our fruit went there." Nye sat beside her, putting star stickers on her own stuffed orange. "Good orange," she told it, proud. James stood in the doorway watching them like he was trying to memorize the scene. Then he turned to his wife and said quietly, "Can you come outside for a minute?" Her stomach tightened out of habit. Because so much of their past, because of that trust, she walked into the yard where the garden. James walked to the small shed by the side fence and opened it. "If you don't like it, you tell me." Her throat tightened. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't a dress. It was a small, clean machine, new and sturdy, with a simple label on the side. A compact, refrigerated unit. The kind they'd been renting time for. The kind that turned hope into capacity. She stared, not understanding for a second. James stepped closer. "It's ours," he said. A small cold room unit. Not huge, but enough to protect your fruit and protect your sleep. Her eyes burned immediately. She didn't cry because of the machine. She cried because of what it meant. No more racing to the rental facility at odd hours. No more praying the temperature holds. No more feeling like the contract could crush them if one day went wrong. James had taken the pressure off her chest and turned it into a plan. "I didn't want to buy anything big while the spotlight was still testing us," he continued gently. "But we passed the first office run. Procurement confirmed scale-up. And I realized, you deserve something that makes your work feel safe." She swallowed hard. James's mouth curved slightly. "CEO contacts," he admitted. "And I used my own money, not the shop's. She stared at him, tears hot on her face. That's too much. He shook his head. That gift changed the air between them. She walked up to the unit and put her palm against it like it was a wall she could lean on. Then she turned back to James. "This isn't just a gift," she whispered. "This is you saying you believe I can keep growing." James nodded, eyes soft. "I believe you already did," he said. "I'm just trying to catch up to your courage." Behind them, the screen door creaked. Anna stepped out with her notebook, like she'd sensed something important. "Mom," she called softly. James's wife wiped her face quickly. "I'm okay," she said, voice shaky. Anna looked at the unit, then at James. "Is that for the fruit?" James nodded. "It's to keep the fruit safe," he said, "and to keep your mom from worrying all night." Anna's face changed, serious, tender. She walked over and placed a care card on top of the unit like a blessing. It read, "You worked hard. Now rest." James pressed his lips together, eyes wet for half a second. Nye toddled out behind Anna, saw everyone gathered, and decided she also needed to contribute. She slapped a star sticker on the side of the unit. Then she declared, loudly, "Big fridge!" They all laughed, real laughter that loosened something in the air. James's mother stood in the doorway watching, hands folded tight. His wife expected her to look jealous. Instead, she looked relieved, like she'd been carrying a guilt she didn't know where to put. And watching James care for them helped her set some of it down. She walked out slowly, then surprised them by saying, "That's a good gift." James's wife nodded, voice quiet. "It is." James's mother looked at her carefully. "You know," she said, trembling slightly, "he never bought things like that for his father. He bought fear. He bought silence." James's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. James's mother swallowed. "This," she said, gesturing toward the unit, "is him choosing love instead." That truth settled over them like a blanket, warm, protective, and earned. They spent the rest of the afternoon doing normal family things. They labeled the unit together. James showed his wife the temperature display and the backup power plan. She made a simple checklist. Anna insisted on drawing a fridge rules sign. Noi ate fruit and tried to press every button until James gently redirected her. At dinner, Anna announced, "Mom is going to sleep more now." James raised his glass of water like it was a toast. "To Mom sleeping?" he said. They all laughed. The bridge. Sometimes love isn't loud. It's a quiet machine humming in the yard, proving someone saw your exhaustion and chose to carry it with you. After bedtime, James and his wife stood in the quiet kitchen, the house finally still. He looked at her like he was checking whether the day had landed safely. "You happy?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I feel protected," she admitted. "And that's bigger than happy." James exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Good," he whispered. His phone buzzed once. He didn't flinch. He just glanced. Then he turned the screen toward her. Procurement email. Approved. Scale to 20. Great first run. Reminder. No home footage requested. James smiled faintly. "They're backing the boundary." She nodded. Then, one more buzz. Unknown number. "Nice unit. Some gifts make enemies. Protect her." James's wife felt the warmth drain from the kitchen. She read the message twice. her hands going cold around her phone. "How do they know about the unit?" she whispered. James's face hardened. "They're watching the house," he said quietly. "Or they have someone local." She looked toward the window, suddenly aware of how exposed their yard felt. The unit sat visible from the side street. Anyone walking past could see it. Anyone asking questions at the hardware store could learn who bought it. James's mother appeared in the doorway, reading their faces before reading the screen. "Another message?" she asked, voice steady. James nodded and showed her. His mother's jaw tightened. "This isn't random," she said. "Someone wants you afraid of your own success." "It's working," James's wife admitted, voice shaking. James's mother walked to the table and sat down like she was settling in for a long conversation. "Then we make a plan," she said firmly. "Fear only wins when you let it make your decisions." So they sat together in the dim kitchen light and talked like a family that had learned how to protect itself. James spoke first. "We document everything," he said. "Every message, every time. We forward to procurement and to the police report we already started." His wife nodded. "And we don't reply," she added. "We let them wonder why we're not scared." James's mother surprised them both. "And we don't hide the unit," she said. "Hiding makes it look like you're ashamed. You're not. You earned it." James looked at his mother with something close to gratitude. "You're right," he said softly. That decision, to stand visible instead of cowering, felt like the first real power they'd taken back. The next morning, James called the procurement director from the back porch while his wife kept the kids inside. The conversation was brief but sharp. "Another message?" James said, forwarding it immediately. "They know about a purchase we made yesterday." The procurement director's voice turned cold. "That's surveillance," he said bluntly. "Not coincidence? I'm escalating this to our security team and copying legal." "What does that mean for us?" James asked. "It means you're not alone in this," the director replied. "And it means if someone's trying to intimidate our vendors, they just made it our problem too." James felt something shift, like the weight he'd been carrying alone was finally being shared by people with resources. "One more thing," the director added. "We're moving your next delivery to a secure loading dock. No public access, no visibility. You bring the fruit, we handle the rest." James thanked him and ended the call feeling steadier than he had in days. When he came back inside, his wife was at the table with Anna, labeling small boxes of fruit for the shop. Anna was drawing stars on each label with concentrated focus. "What did they say?" his wife asked quietly. "They're treating it like a security issue," James said. "And they're protecting the delivery route." Her shoulders dropped slightly. "So we keep going?" James crouched beside her chair. "We keep going," he said, "but smarter. And not alone." That afternoon, James did something unexpected. He walked next door to Mr. Hung's house and knocked. Mr. Hung opened the door with his usual unreadable expression. "Problem?" he asked. "Advice," James replied. Mr. Hung stepped outside and closed the door behind him. They stood in the narrow space between their homes, the place where neighbors talked when words mattered. James explained the messages. Not everything. Just enough. Mr. Hung listened without interrupting. Then he said something simple and devastating. "Someone local is feeding information out." James's chest tightened. "You think so?" "I know so," Mr. Hung said. "Strangers don't notice new equipment. Neighbors do." James felt anger rise in his throat. "Who?" Mr. Hung shook his head. "Doesn't matter yet," he said. "What matters is you stop giving them things to report." How? James. You cover the unit, Mr. Hung said. Not to hide it, to make it boring. You put a tarp over it like it's under maintenance. You make it for... James nodded slowly. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. Mr. Hung added one more thing. And you keep your family inside at delivery times. Don't give them faces to attach to the work. James extended his hand. Thank you, he said. Mr. Hung shook it once, firm. Quiet discipline, he repeated. Then he went back inside. That evening, James and his wife covered the unit with a plain tarp and added a handwritten sign, Maintenance, do not touch. It looked temporary, unimportant, exactly what they needed. Anna watched from the doorway, confused. Why are we hiding the fridge? She asked. James crouched to her level. We're not hiding it, he said gently. We're protecting it. Sometimes the best way to keep something safe is to make people stop looking at it. Anna thought about that, then nodded seriously. Like camouflage, she said. James smiled. Exactly like camouflage. The next week, the delivery to the secure loading dock went flawlessly. No foot traffic, no cameras, no questions. Just clean work behind locked doors. Procurement scanned every box, signed every log, and the director shook James's hand with quiet respect. You handled the pressure well, he said. James's wife stood beside him, tired but steady. We're learning, she said. The director nodded. Keep learning, he replied, and keep us informed. On the drive home, James's mother, who had ridden along again as their quiet witness, said something that stayed with them. Your father used to say that people who can't build try to break, she said softly. But breaking only works if you're fragile. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. We're not fragile, he said. I know, his mother replied. That's why they're failing. The next week, none came either. By the third week, the silence felt less like a trap and more like proof. Proof that standing, the unit hummed quietly under its tarp. The shop stayed steady. The kids stayed safe. James's mother stayed close, and slowly, the fear that had wrapped around their throats like smoke began to lift. One evening, a month after the gift, James's phone buzzed with a text from procurement. 40-box order approved. Contract extended 6 months. Integrity recognized. Well done, James showed his wife. She smiled, not relieved, but proud. Anna wandered into the kitchen holding a drawing. I made the fridge happy, she said, showing a crayon picture of the unit surrounded by stars and hearts. James lifted her onto his lap. It is happy, he said, because you blessed it. Nye toddled over, demanding equal attention. James's mother watched from the doorway, dish towel in hand, and said softly, This is what winning looks like. Outside, the Hill Fruits light stayed on. Inside, the covered unit hummed like a protected promise. And the ending stayed open. Not because they were afraid of joy, but because they were learning how to keep it. Have you ever had to protect something precious by making it look ordinary? Sometimes the bravest thing we do is refuse to perform our happiness for strangers.